What does it take to make the impossible happen? Because there is a place on this earth deep in the folds of the Himalayan foothills, a place so remote, so hostile, so utterly unforgiving that when engineers first visited the site, they didn't arrive by truck or helicopter or railway. They arrived on the backs of donkeys. And when the journey back down felt too dangerous on those treacherous mountain paths, they hopped onto boats and floated down the river instead. This is not fiction. This is not a movie. This is real. This is India. And India just built a bridge there. Not just any bridge, a record-breaking bridge. A bridge that stands hundreds of meters above a raging river. A bridge that had to be engineered to withstand earthquakes, survive hurricane-force winds, handle the kind of temperature extremes that make steel expand and contract like a living thing. And do all of this while sitting in one of the most politically sensitive, militarized, and contested regions on the planet. And while all of that was happening, India was also transforming a swamp, a literal swamp, filled with unstable mud, a 92-meter hill of solid rock, and a river running straight through the middle of it into what is set to become one of the busiest and most beautiful airports in the entire world. Two projects, two impossible missions, one country. This is the story of what India is doing right now, at this very moment in history. And if you're not paying attention, you are missing something extraordinary. What kind of country builds a railway through the Himalayas? What kind of country looks at that landscape and says, yes, we'll build there? India does. The Chenab Bridge is just one part of a 169-kilometer railway line cutting through some of the harshest terrain on Earth. Along that single stretch are 943 bridges and 36 tunnels, including one tunnel that runs 7 miles underground. The entire project costs about $5 billion. To put that in perspective, in New York City, $5 billion might build just 2 miles of subway tunnel. In India's Himalayas, it built a complete all-weather railway line through mountains. But numbers don't tell the real story. This railway runs through the rugged foothills near Reese steep cliffs, deep canyons, no flat land, no proper roads. In the early days, engineers had to reach the site on foot, sometimes on donkeys, and even leave by boat when paths became too dangerous. And in this remote wilderness, they built a bridge requiring 30,000 tons of steel. 30,000 tons. On a mountain, with no roads. Before we talk about how India actually solved this problem, and it did solve it, spectacularly, let's talk about the forces that were working against every single person on this project. The weather alone could have ended this. Temperatures at the Chenab Bridge site do not behave the way temperatures behave in most places. They swing to extremes. On a scorching summer day, the air can reach 50 degrees Celsius. That is hot enough to fry an egg on stone. And then in the cold months, those same mountains drop to freezing. This is not unusual for high-altitude environments. But what makes the Chenab site uniquely brutal is what those temperature swings do to the steel. Steel is not a passive material. It breathes. It expands in heat and contracts in cold. And when a bridge arch made of steel is sitting in a canyon where sunlight only strikes certain sections at a time, you end up with different parts of the same structure operating at different temperatures simultaneously. One side of the arch might be warming in afternoon sun, while the other side sits in shadow and cold. This causes the steel to flex. It bends, slightly, invisibly to the naked eye, but enough to matter enormously when a loaded passenger train is rolling across the top. Then there is the canyon itself, and this is where things get genuinely terrifying. A canyon, by its very shape, acts as a natural funnel for wind. When moving air enters a narrow passage, the pressure drops and the speed increases dramatically. This is a principle of physics known as the Venturi effect. And in the canyon where the Chenab Bridge was to be built, this effect generates wind gusts of up to 165 miles per hour. For comparison, a Category 5 hurricane, the most powerful classification of hurricane that exists, requires sustained wind speeds of 157 miles per hour. The canyon near Riasi casually produces gusts that exceed that. Now imagine you are a construction worker. You are hundreds of meters above the canyon floor. Below you, through gaps in the scaffolding, you can see a river that looks like a tiny blue-gray ribbon. Your job is to help maneuver enormous steel components into precise positions. The steel around you weighs thousands of tons. The wind at any moment can surge to speeds that would throw an unattended vehicle off a road. This is what people were doing. This is what they showed up for day after day, for years. And then the ground itself might shake. The Himalayas sit in a seismically active zone. Earthquakes are not rare here. They are expected, planned for, treated as a given, the way a coastal city plans for storms. Every design decision on this project had to account for the possibility that the Earth itself would lurch and shudder beneath a structure that was already being battered by catastrophic wind and extreme temperature changes. Any one of these challenges, wind, temperature, seismic activity, remoteness, would have been considered a significant engineering obstacle on its own. All of them together, in the same location, on a project of this scale, that sounds less like an engineering challenge and more like a test. A test to see whether human determination has limits. India took the test and passed. But here is something that rarely gets discussed when people talk about the Chenab Bridge and the railway line it belongs to. This project did not happen in a vacuum. Kashmir, the region this railway is designed to connect, is not simply a beautiful mountain valley. It is one of the most heavily militarized and politically contested territories anywhere in the world. Both India and Pakistan claim portions of it. Both administer different parts of it. The tension between the two nations over this territory has lasted for decades and has, at various points in history, erupted into open conflict. India's decision to push an all-weather railway line through this region was not purely a logistical decision, or rather, it was because the existing road connections through these mountains, particularly National Highway 44, are regularly blocked by snow, cutting off Kashmir Valley from the rest of the country for extended periods. An all-weather rail connection genuinely transforms the lives of people living in the region. It offers economic opportunity, reliable transportation, a link to the rest of the nation that does not disappear every winter. But opponents of the project have argued that the railway serves another purpose too, that it is a tool for strengthening central authority over a disputed and restive region. These concerns are not invented. They come from real people with real fears, and they existed alongside the construction work, a political undercurrent beneath every poured concrete foundation and every welded steel joint. Understanding this context does not diminish what was built. If anything, it makes the achievement more complicated, more human, more real. This was not simply an engineering project. It was a statement, and it was made in steel and concrete and sweat on the sides of mountains by workers who got there on donkeys. So how did they do it? How do you move 30,000 tons of steel to a location that has no roads, no factories, no infrastructure, and no flat ground? You build the infrastructure first. India's construction teams built 26 kilometers of roads specifically for this project. Roads that clung to the edges of cliffs, roads that wound around mountainsides at angles that would make a casual observer dizzy. Roads built purely to serve this one construction effort, roads that would not have existed otherwise, roads that exist only because someone looked at this impossible location and decided that the first step was to make it possible to get there at all. And then the steel itself, all 30,000 tons of it, was transported flat. Like the components of a piece of furniture packed into a flat box, all the steel arrived in plates, unassembled. All the cutting, all the drilling, all the shaping was done on site, in fabrication workshops built right there on either side of the canyon. This is not how modern large-scale construction typically works. Usually components are prefabricated in distant factories and transported, ready to assemble. Here the factory had to come to the site, and the site was hundreds of meters above a river in the Himalayas. Then there was the question of the bridge's design, and this is where the engineers made a decision that was not just clever, but genuinely elegant. A canyon is shaped like the letter V, and the problem with building a bridge in a V-shaped canyon, particularly in a canyon where the rock on the walls is fractured and unstable, is that conventional tower and cable designs create forces that push outward against the canyon walls. In unstable rock, this creates a tendency for the structure to slowly slide and slip. the towers wanting to creep down the slopes under the enormous weight pressing on them. The solution was an arch, not a decorative arch, not an arch as a stylistic flourish, but an arch as a structural philosophy. The Chenab Bridge is an arch bridge. It begins at both ends of the canyon, and the two halves grow toward each other, meeting in the middle. When those two halves meet and lock together, the physics changes completely. Instead of pushing outward, the forces are redirected downward. The arch pushes its weight down through its legs and into the solid base of the canyon walls. The whole structure, in a sense, locks itself in place. The more weight it carries, the more firmly it presses itself into the mountain. It is a design philosophy that has been around for centuries, refined and reapplied here in one of the most hostile environments on Earth, scaled up to a size that makes the canyon itself feel almost manageable. To actually build the arch, engineers constructed what is essentially an aerial cable system, a cable crane that stretches from one side of the canyon to the other. Towers were erected on both canyon walls and a cable connected them, creating a kind of elevated track. Steel components for the arch were then carried across this cable system and positioned precisely where they needed to go. Each half of the arch grew from the ground up, held in place by cables anchored deep into the rock, preventing the growing structure from toppling into the canyon below during the construction process. The wind analysis alone took years. Engineers created a scale model of the bridge, 1/50th of the actual size, and tested it in a wind tunnel. But wind tunnel testing only captures abstract wind behavior. It cannot capture the specific chaotic patterns created by this particular canyon in these particular mountains. So computational modeling was added digital simulations of the landscape, the hills, the valleys, the canyon, built into software that could calculate how wind accelerates as it funnels through the terrain. What the teams found was sobering. The local topography was amplifying wind speeds by as much as 20% above baseline measurements. A wind speed of 50 meters per second was, in practice, becoming 60 or 70 meters per second in certain locations around the bridge. Every structural calculation had to be revised upward, and the earthquake problem, which sounds terrifying and insurmountable, turned out to have a counterintuitive solution embedded in the bridge's own scale. When an earthquake shakes the ground, it moves the earth by a fixed amount. The shaking is constant, regardless of what sits on top of it. But for a very large structure, the relative effect of that shaking diminishes. If an earthquake moves the ground by 10 centimeters, that movement represents a much smaller proportion of a very long bridge's total span than it would for a short one. The Chenab Bridge is so large that typical seismic activity in the region has a proportionally smaller impact on the main arch than it would on a conventional sized bridge. The seismic challenge still had to be managed carefully in the approach structures and surrounding sections, but the central arch, the heart of the bridge, was actually aided in earthquake resilience by its own enormous size. The temperature problem was solved with a combination of engineering and material science. The rails running across the top of the bridge were pre-stressed, pulled tight before installation, creating tension in the steel that counteracts the tendency to buckle under heat or contract under cold. And crucially, the rails are not rigidly fixed to the bridge deck. They sit in their mountings but are free to slide slightly back and forth as the bridge expands and contracts beneath them. The bridge moves. The rails accommodate that movement, and the train passes over all of it in safety. When the line was finally inaugurated, in the summer of the year before last, it had been more than 20 years since construction first began. 20 years of fighting mountains and weather and politics and physics. 20 years of donkey rides and boat journeys and roads carved into cliff faces. 20 years of workers standing hundreds of meters above a river in winds that could have killed them, bolting steel plates together in the knowledge that trains carrying real people with real lives would eventually cross where they stood. David Mackenzie, who has been involved since 2004 and has watched this bridge grow from nothing, keeps a photograph of the completed Chenab Bridge on his laptop. He looks at it every day. This is a man who has worked on extraordinary structures all over the world throughout his career. And this particular bridge, in this particular canyon, built under these particular conditions, this is the one that he calls the challenge he is most passionate about. The one that, in his words, tugs at his heart. When a veteran engineer who has seen everything says that, you listen. The Chenab Bridge stands now. It carries trains. It connects people who were previously cut off. It exists in a place where, for all of recorded human history, nothing like it existed. And it was built by India. If the Chenab Bridge is India's answer to the challenge of extreme terrain, then the Navi Mumbai International Airport is India's answer to the challenge of extreme ambition. And the ambition here is breathtaking. India's aviation sector is one of the fastest growing in the entire world. Only China and the United States handle more air traffic growth, and at the center of Indian commerce, at the heart of the country's financial power, sits Mumbai, a city that has historically been served by a single major airport. 1. For one of the world's largest and most economically significant metropolitan areas, there has been exactly one major airport. To put this in perspective, London, a city of roughly similar global economic importance, is served by 6 major airports. Those 6 airports together handled 177 million passengers in a single recent year. Having just one major airport in Mumbai is, by comparison, like London, trying to handle all of that traffic through Heathrow alone. The numbers simply don't work. The capacity isn't there. And as India's aviation sector has doubled the number of operational airports across the country in a single decade under a determined program of infrastructure modernization, Mumbai has remained bottlenecked. The solution was obvious: build a second major airport. The difficulty was everything else. Finding land for a major new airport near one of the world's most densely packed cities is, in most circumstances, essentially impossible. Mumbai is a city that grew on a peninsula, hemmed in by water on 3 sides, with urban development spreading in every direction. The existing airport, Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj International, is already operating beyond comfortable capacity. It has tried to expand. The irregular shape of its terminals, with asymmetrical concourses that look as though they were started and then cut off partway through, tells the story. On one side, communities that could not be fully relocated, forced a redesign. The runway configuration with intersecting strips that prevent simultaneous landings and takeoffs limits traffic further. There is simply no room to breathe. After a 10-year search for a suitable location, and then another 3 years of land acquisition, India settled on a site approximately 40 kilometers from the old commercial center of the city. Navi Mumbai, New Mumbai, a growing zone across the water from the original city. On paper, the location made sense. There was space. There was room to build something significant. In practice, the site was a nightmare of a specific and vivid kind. The land earmarked for the new airport was largely built on swamp. Not damp ground, not occasionally waterlogged fields, but genuine swampland mudflats, unstable soil, mangrove forest growing in brackish water, soft, shifting, unreliable ground that could not, without enormous intervention, support the weight of a runway, let alone multiple terminals and cargo facilities. And rising out of the middle of this swamp, like a geological joke, was a hill, a solid hill of rock, 92 meters tall, sitting squarely in the middle of where the terminal and runways needed to go. 92 meters. That is approximately the height of a 30-story building, and it was solid. It had to be completely removed before a single foundation could be poured. And if that were not enough, running straight through the middle of the site was a river, a real flowing river. Not a creek, not a drainage channel, a river that had to be moved before construction could begin. Swamp, mountain, river, all in the same place, all in the way. This was the site India chose, after 10 years of looking, for its major new international airport, and they built it anyway. The sequence of what happened next at Navi Mumbai is, in its own way, just as remarkable as anything happening in the Himalayan canyons. The hill came first. 62 million cubic meters of solid rock were removed through controlled blasting. The explosive charges were carefully calibrated, designed to shatter the rock into fragments of specific sizes that would be useful later, not just rubble to be disposed of. This was not demolition for demolition's sake. It was demolition with a plan. Because here is the thing about building an airport on a swamp. You need to raise the ground level. You need to fill in the soft, unstable mudflats and create a solid, elevated base, on which runways and buildings can sit. And to do that, you need an enormous quantity of fill material. In most situations, this material has to be sourced, transported, and paid for. In Navi Mumbai, the fill material was sitting in the middle of the site in the form of a 92-meter hill that was going to be demolished anyway. The blasted rock fragments from the hill were used to fill the swampland. They were dumped into the marshy areas, their weight compressing and displacing the soft clay beneath, pushing it aside and down. Over time, the accumulated rock stabilized the ground not perfectly, not completely, but enough to reduce the amount of additional ground treatment required. The site was raised by roughly 6 meters. The swamp became solid enough to build on. Then the river was rerouted. The watercourse that had previously cut through the middle of the site was redirected, diverted around the airport perimeter at an angle, channeled away from the runways and terminals. But the communities surrounding the airport villages that had watched this entire transformation from the beginning raised a legitimate and serious concern. The swampland that was being filled in had served a natural function. Wetlands absorb water, mangroves soak up rainfall, soft mudflats slow the movement of floodwater. By replacing all of that absorbent, flexible natural landscape with hard rock fill, the airport site was creating a situation where heavy monsoon rainfall had nowhere to go except into those surrounding villages. The response was to expand the river that had been redirected. In some stretches, the channel was widened from 25 meters to 200 meters. The enlarged river, deeper, broader, capable of handling significantly more volume, would serve as the flood control system for the entire transformed landscape. The natural sponge of the wetlands was being replaced, at least in part, by an engineered drainage solution. Overhead power lines that crossed the site were moved underground, out of the path of aircraft. After 7 years of this preparation work, after the hill was gone, and the swamp was filled, and the river had been moved and the power lines had been buried, the first phase of the airport finally opened on Christmas Day 2025. Phase 1 of Navi Mumbai International Airport is not a temporary solution, not a placeholder, not a partial answer. It is a functioning international airport with a control tower, a fire station, a runway, and a terminal building. From day one, it is capable of handling 20 million passengers a year and 500,000 metric tons of cargo. And it is, by any reasonable aesthetic standard, stunning. The airport was designed by Zaha Hadid Architects, a world-famous design firm. The building is inspired by the lotus flower, India's national flower. Its curved shape and flowing roof look like petals opening. At the front, 12 columns are shaped like flower petals and help bring soft light into the terminal. Inside, 17 larger hidden columns hold up the huge roof. The roof is 370 meters long. Strong steel beams carry the weight, so the space inside can stay wide and open without many columns blocking the view. The skylights let in sunlight and also collect rainwater during the monsoon. The design is not just beautiful, it is practical and strong. The airport uses reinforced concrete and precast panels to speed up construction. When fully finished in the 2030s, Navi Mumbai International Airport will have 2 runways that can operate at the same time, 3 more terminals, and larger cargo areas. It will handle up to 90 million passengers a year and over 3 million tons of cargo, more passengers than Singapore's Changi Airport handles today. India isn't waiting for permission to rise. It's building in the mountains, in the swamps, against terrain that defeats most nations before they even begin. The Chenab Bridge stands, the airport is operational, the railway runs through the Himalayas, and this is just the beginning. If a nation can place 30,000 tons of steel across a hostile canyon and turn wetlands into a global aviation hub, the real question isn't, can India do it? It's how far will it go? Is the world paying attention? If you believe this is only the start, hit like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments, what should India build next?